lovers. I am so blessed and honored to be in a position to share, tools and tips and tricks that have the potential to heal and to bring you to a place of full sexual embodiment. And one of the tools that I absolutely love and have been using for the better part of a decade are crystal yoni products, including pleasure wands and yoni eggs. And I was so excited to recently come across a brand called Wands, Wands. I met the founder here in Austin and I absolutely loved who she was. I love getting to know the people behind the products that I like to use. And I just loved her mission to really support women and men to explore, celebrate, and honor their sexuality. I felt this transmission of slow, sensual seduction in all of who she was and all that she brought to the world. So I went ahead and gave it a try. I purchased a blue quartz Emerita wand, and the Emerita wand is great because it has this like cool bulby end on it, which is designed for G-spot and cervical stimulation, but can also be used for prostate stimulation. So it's great for men and women and can even be used between partners. So I'm so honored to have built this relationship with her and to be able to offer you guys an amazing discount code. So if you use the code Leola, Leola, that will give you 15% off all products. And the website is wands.com, WAANDS.com. And we'll go ahead and link that in the show notes as well for you. So thank you so much for listening. And also you're welcome for the inevitable pleasure and healing and ecstasy that is coming your way with these products. Let's dive into the episode.
Welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. So today I have a special guest, Dr. Nisha, who is an MD, who specializes in integrating functional medicine and Ayurveda. Did I get that right? Perfect. Great. And yeah, she's going to be sharing with us a little bit about her journey and, integrating and weaving in some of these more holistic practices to live a juicy, expansive, freedom-oriented life. To me, having a healthy body is such a big piece of living a healthy life. And Nisha's great because she's also here in Austin, and I met her through a group of beautiful sisters and women here in Austin. And I just love that we're here in my physical space as well. And we get to just chat in real time about all these things. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you discovered the path and purpose of becoming just like a servant in health?
Honestly, I think healing anyone begins with yourself, or a curiosity to heal yourself.
Yeah.
So the initiation into what career should I choose was, how can I learn more about me?
Yeah.
And how things work so that I can be the best version of myself. And then the sort of product of that was in healing others.
When you said, when I was choosing my career, I thought about how can I learn more about, or what path will help me learn more about myself. That actually gave me chills. Like no one talks about choosing a path based on like that question, but I really resonate with that. And for me, it wasn't so much like that wasn't how I chose my career at all. And it took me a minute to get to what I'm doing now as well. But in getting to what I'm getting to now, it was a path of my own healing my sexual trauma, healing my relationship to my body, healing my relationship to even what's just like possible for me in like living this life. And going through that journey itself was inspiring to other people, and they asked about it, and that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing. But that's really interesting that you kind of like went at it from the beginning, like what path is going to serve me to serve others as well. Like,
yeah, and I think there's some kind of maybe irony, or even it's a little taboo to admit that, because most people, when you ask them, why did you become a doctor? They'll say, I want to help others.
Yeah.
And I think if you dig deep enough, you'll be able to answer that you can only really help people from your own place of healing. You can only meet people in as much of a capacity as you've met yourself.
Yeah.
And so I feel like our gifts are things that come as the product of having moved through our own experience, and then it's an offering. So our life is about really choosing what feels in alignment and feels in flow for us, so that that becomes our dharma, that becomes where the truest place that we can serve from.
Yeah, I think that's just such a gorgeous way of being and doing in the world. I shared something the other day on my Instagram that was along the lines of, when you prioritize yourself, you're prioritizing everyone else just by default. When you take care of yourself and you come from a place that's so overflowing and juicy and like authentically you, that alone becomes this inspiration and evidence of what's possible for others in their relationship to self. And generally speaking, when people are choosing their career path, it's like, what's going to make money, really? Like, that's like, I mean, that's what I think most of our parents are more concerned about. Like, how are you going to be supported by the world in what you do? And it gets to be both. Like, it gets to be, how can you be supported by the world in what you do, but also not just financially, also in like a holistic way of being. And it sounds like you found that. So I'm curious, like, so you chose this path based on that question, how can I be served through my work as well? And you landed on being a doctor, which is so cool. What was happening for you that made you choose that? Like, that made you feel like being a doctor would serve you?
Well, before I answer that, I just wanted to say one thing around what you just shared. So in Ayurveda, everything's in verse, everything's in poetry. And so when you learn like a poetic phrase, and that's how it stays in your mind. And so one of the phrases is around the four aims of life. And it's dharma, artha, kama, moksha. And so what that means is that when you follow natural law, because dharma can mean duty, but it can also, the truer meaning of it is natural law.
Yeah.
So when you follow what's natural to you, when you are in tune with what feels juicy to you, that is the pathway through which you're going to receive the most wealth, the most artha. So from following your natural gifts, your natural joy, your pleasure, you're able to attain wealth. With that wealth, you fulfill your desires, you fulfill your needs and your desires. That's kama. And then through this cycle of doing what's natural to you based on your gifts and your juiciness, and earning wealth through that, and then achieving your desires, you attain enlightenment, you attain that release, because you're no longer governed by the desire. You've achieved it. You've been able to kind of go through the full cycle.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say that piece before we moved on.
I love that. I love that you shared it. And when you said that it's spoken through, like the wisdom is spoken through poetry, I was like, oh, I want to hear an example. And then you went right into it. And I was like, great, this is all in flow. Perfect. I love that. Thank you for speaking into that. And now let's hear more about your specific path.
Yeah, so I didn't have any specific physical ailments or mental ailments that were driving me to seek that knowledge of how to heal. It was just a curiosity of, how does the body work? Like, what happens? What's going on in our cells? And it was just wanting to know more about the self in terms of what is the orchestra that's happening within this being.
Yeah.
And that was the initial push to become a medical doctor and go to medical school. And then, I'm in my 4th decade now of life. And so there have been some ailments that popped up along the way, and those have prompted me to dive a little deeper and to seek alternative modalities, when the traditional way didn't work.
Yeah, amazing. So I'd love to speak into a bit more, like, what is what is functional medicine? What is Ayurveda? How are these things related? And like, yeah, just giving people a little bit more context of like, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, so Ayurveda and functional medicine share a common thread of the belief that disease begins in the gut, and that's,
Yeah.
I mean, Hippocrates said that too,
I didn't know that. Amazing.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that about either of those two. I know a bit about these modalities, but I had no idea that they believe that it begins in the gut, but it makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think that's what excited me is that I was hearing things from different places in the world that cropped up at different times, but they're saying the same thing. Because functional medicine is very new, it's very Western, and then Ayurveda is thousands of years old and it's from India. And so I think the common thread being that it's the center of our body that's governing everything that happens in the periphery, including the mind. So you may have heard of the gut-brain connection, but it's all in the gut, it's all in the center. And so much of healing is a return to center. Yeah. And that can be interpreted on multiple levels. But in Ayurveda, the word for this center of the body is Agni. It's your fire. Yeah. And through ancient spiritual times, there's been fire worship, and there's threads that go through spirituality and medicine that kind of align us to our inner flame, our fire.
Yeah. Fascinating. Super fascinating. So my first introduction to Ayurveda, I was in Nepal. I was actually first in India, filming a documentary with a group that freed children from sex trafficking, which is unrelated to this story, but somehow felt right to be that in. And afterwards, we went to Nepal for a couple of days just for like fun, me and my friend. And I've been wanting to go to Nepal for like years and years and years. And this is really like, from my understanding, kind of like the birthplace of some of these sciences, including Ayurveda. Yeah. So we went to this really beautiful resort that was on the edge of the Himalayas, just like stunning. And it had like included in the room, it had all of these like tools included, or like modalities, including, yoga and breath work, and there was a Himalayan salt room, and it was like arts and crafts and all these tantric arts really. And then there was also an Ayurvedic doctor, and it was like included in your room fee, or like your resort fee, to go to the Ayurvedic doctor and like get a checkup or like a reading, or I don't know. And I went, and I remember he's like taking it wasn't a super in-depth like process. He like took my heart rate and my temperature and just like looked at me basically, and like maybe looked at my tongue, I don't know. And he started telling me what my doshas were and my breakdown. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what I mean with doshas, and then I can go back and continue my story?
Yeah, sure. Well, that sounds like an amazing place to go. So doshas so Ayurveda is about the elements. It's about the 5 major elements, and these exist in our outer environment and they exist in our inner environment. So either air, fire, water, earth. They're part of you. So it's what connects you, the microcosm, to the macrocosm, to your environment. So you're never disconnected. So what's happening outside the body is going to influence what's happening in the body. And then everything, like this drink that you're having, has certain elements in it. It's a coffee, so it's got more of the fire element. Yeah. And so if it's really hot outside and you find yourself overheating, maybe you wouldn't have the coffee. Yeah. And so in the winter time or in the fall, it would be the perfect thing to balance you, because opposites balance and like increases like. That's a basic Ayurvedic principle. And so these elements come together to form doshas. So it's the heavier, denser elements of earth and water that come together to form kapha. And then water and fire come together to form pitta, the fiery element. Yeah. And then air and space come together to form vata. And so that's what the doshas are. It's not like just words that people came up with. I mean, obviously there are words, but they're really something that you can be very in touch with, because you can think about air and space and you can think, well, what are the qualities of air and space? It's light, it's mobile, it's subtle. And these are the qualities that then will be manifested in a body and a constitution that is dominant in that. So somebody like you've got more of that vata quality. And so you likely are much more creative than other people in other doshas. So you've got the creative, intuitive aspects that are of the ether. It's easier for you to connect with intuition and those sort of subtler sciences. Because, and like your beautiful space, like it's no surprise to me that this body type, this mind body constitution created this space, because it's just totally magical and beautiful and whimsical, and those are all the qualities of air and space.
Beautiful. So love that you explained all those so perfectly and holistically. And basically, so when I went into this doctor's office, he said vata first, and then he did a couple measurements. He's like, oh, actually there's quite a lot of pitta there as well, that fire piece. And I remember being like so resistant to what he was saying, like, no, I'm not fire, or like whatever. And I was like, I'm very earthy, like I'm a very ground, like I didn't get it. Like my mind was just like, I'm a grounded person, like just didn't really want to take it. And he was also telling me like I couldn't eat foods that I like happen to really love. Like he was like, you shouldn't eat a lot of spicy foods. I'm like, oh, I really like spicy though. But for my constitution, adding that fire is not necessarily the best thing for me. And of course, he's totally right. Every time I eat something spicy, it moves through my body way too quickly. But I do love it. Which, speaking of which, there was also, fast forward a few years later in LA, I came across someone else that practiced Ayurveda who became a friend. And he told me the way that you experience spicy food is very likely how you experience sex. And that's why you like spicy food so much, because it's like that spice is drawing the energy down your body back down to your root chakra, which is also where your sexual organs are. So I thought that was just fascinating. And it's true, like if I eat like hot wings or something, this is so silly, it's like sex for me. Small amounts though these days. And same with the coffee. That's why I drink Rasa, because it's not as much coffee, but I still need to have a little bit.
Well, one thing about that real quick. So the saying in Ayurveda is that when your body is fully in balance, you can trust your cravings.
Okay.
But when it's even a little bit out of balance, the tendency will be to propagate the imbalance. So you can't trust the cravings of an imbalanced body. So it may be that desire for spicy food or liking spicy food is actually taking you further away from your center.
That makes so much sense.
And that's where the craving comes from.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because I think, kind of relating it to sexuality, it could be a little bit of a similarity or analogy between, is sex for you something that takes you further away from your center, or is it something like, is that something you enjoy, or could sex also be pleasurable if it brings you even more embodied and more into your center, depending on your Ayurvedic constitution and where you are in the kind of spectrum of balance to imbalance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is so much about intention. And I know what you're talking about, where it's like there's a craving that feels like nourishing, and there's a craving that feels erratic in a way. And it's the only way that I have really to explain it. But that being said, the doctor says all these things. I'm like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This Ayurveda stuff is so woo-woo. I'm like not believing it. This is years ago, by the way, like 6 years ago, 5 years ago. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But then I went home and I just kind of wrote it off. And then, a year later or whatever, I actually started, by coincidence, was just like studying Tantra, and had actually started to work in the space professionally at this time. And then the world shut down with the pandemic. And I knew things were not right with like my digestive system. Like it was just like, it was very obvious that like I wasn't at peak health in that category. And with the pandemic, so many of us had that opportunity to really focus on like what wasn't working. And so one of the things I really devoted myself to, especially in this first couple of months when we were home all of the time, was my health. And so I was trying like a couple of different diets and things to figure out what was working. And I ended up, considering, what, I'm just going to give this doctor from Ayurveda the benefit of the doubt and just try what he suggested. And it worked. It was like, oh, okay, like there was something there. And it was really incredible. And then I started, like, every time I go to the grocery store, I'd have Joyful Belly, like the Ayurvedic, I don't know, like recipe website up, and I would be searching ingredients and being like, okay, can I have this? Can I have that? What's going to be supportive to my body? And it was really impactful. And I think it just, in that time, there were so many other things that were accelerating in my life and in my embodiment, that having that really nourished, like healthy diet and like awareness of my body was just so supportive in allowing me to expand. Because for me, like if there's something off in my body, it's like I can't get like anything really done or really focus. Like it's that root chakra, like I need to feel good in my body. So
yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose of Ayurveda.
yeah.
Why does it exist? It exists as a sister science of yoga and Tantra because it's exactly what you said. It's the knowledge, the science of life. Like that's what it means, the science. Veda, science, or body of knowledge. Ayu is Ayurvedic life. And so it's how does a being, a dosha, constitution, an individual, how do they live their life to support their spirituality, and of course the connection between spirituality, tantra, sexuality. So it's all about this connection to something bigger than you, the divine, whether that's through whichever your path is. But you can't get there. You can't get into your creative flow, into your creative tantric flow or your spiritual flow. You can't get into it if you're ailing, if you didn't sleep, and if you're, running to use the restroom and your body hurts, you're having a rash that itches. Like these are things that, you do have a physical body, you got to take care of it so that you're not thinking about your body and you can think elsewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like right on. Whenever there's like anything off in my body, it's like I really can't focus on the bigger picture. So when we have a lifestyle that's supportive of our body, we're literally set free. We're set free to think about bigger picture stuff. And that's one thing that Ayurveda and Tantra have given me, is having that sort of lifestyle that's supportive of each other. So for people who are interested in Ayurveda specifically, what are like first steps? Where would you send them to get more information, to figure out what their dosha is, all those things?
Yes, so there's plenty of quizzes online where you can figure out what your constitution is. The trick is that you need to take it twice, and take it one as what's been true for you as a child, and once as if what's true for you now, because that gives you your innate constitution or prakriti, and then it also gives you your vikriti, which is your current constitution, your current state of imbalance. And so in Ayurveda, you're not trying to balance out all the doshas. You're not trying to like get somewhere that's out there. You're just trying to get back to home. You're trying to get back to what's innate for you. And that's balance. And so, it's helpful to take it twice so you can see, okay, this was my innate true constitution, and then here I have deviated, vatas up, for example, there's too much air and space, I'm not sleeping, I'm anxious, whatever it is, it's showing up this way. And then in order to bring myself back to balance, I'll have to decrease the vata.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I love just this idea of finding that balance. What do you suggest for people that are in partnerships and maybe their constitutions are different? Yeah,
it's interesting. Oftentimes, we say opposites attract, but I feel that there is a lot of connection between partners where they're very similar in some ways, and they are the same dosha. But for partners, I mean, it's good to know yourself. It's good to know who you are and what supports you, and what lifestyle practices and what foods support you. And then you may just, shift those slightly when you're living in the same space and sharing, so that but you need to come from that place of knowing, so that you're not just like, oh, well, I like this. And then your partner's like, well, I like this, but if you can like back it up with, this is what really supports me, and this is the evidence, and this is why, then I think it just creates more understanding for both yourself as well as your partner. So they're like, oh, well, this is what she needs to stay in balance so that she can be her best self, and this is what he needs. And then through that understanding, you guys are just able to support each other, even if you have differences.
Yeah, I also liked that you shared this piece on, you have your innate constitution, but then you have your constitution you've developed in your life. So I feel like my innate is probably more Vata, and then I've developed more Pitta, maybe, I don't know. And then I think Andrew, my fiance, is innate Kapha, but he's also developed Pitta as well. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And we both definitely have a little bit of that more fiery energy in our lives now as well, and a lot of transformation happening and things like that. So it is important for us to come back into our more grounded space and have really nourished foods. And one of the things that's been really supportive for me that I noticed was like always eating really fast and like doing a bunch of things at once. And it's been really nourishing and supportive for me in this partnership to be able to slow down and make it more my mission to like cook us 3 meals a day and like have it be a part of my devotion to the relationship as well as to myself. And it can be interesting to find that support within each other, which wasn't really necessarily expected or a part of the original relationship, but
and you guys are both in your Pitta stage of life too, because there's the Vata, Pitta, Kapha stages of life. It's childhood, it's more Kapha, and you're growing, you're a chubby baby, and then Pitta is like that stage of transformation. It's a stage where you're really out there in the world, putting your gifts out and making an impact. And then Vata is the later stage of life where things are just kind of falling into closure, like things just sort of weather away, like air would erode a rock, and things just kind of go back to the beginning where they started, like you go from dust to dust, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is that process of life. And so you both are probably in your Pitta stage of life. So there's the need for that fire, but it's also good to know what's going to keep you in balance so that fire doesn't go out of control, or it doesn't get, lashed out on each other,
Yeah, because that happened. We've managed to find our flow, thankfully, at this stage in the relationship, but it was definitely like firefighting fire for a minute. And I think that was also part of the attraction, was like, wow, we can actually meet each other, feel met in this. When it comes to these 3 doshas, I'm curious if you could give like 1 or 2 principles for each one in terms of like finding balance.
They say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And this is something that I really, really resonate with. And as I've invested in living a tantric lifestyle, my relationships have evolved and become so much more juicy and liberating. And I believe that this is something that everyone deserves. However, finding these people can be a little bit challenging at first. And so it is my mission to create more spaces for people to find individuals that are resonant with the tantric lifestyle, that are really resonant with you, the listener, the person who is investing their time into living a life that is expansive and liberating. So with that, I am committed to creating more and more safe spaces for people to discover their desires and practice their boundaries, to connect in community, to celebrate and to grow together so that we can all step into a more authentic version of ourselves and experience truly unconditional love. So we have Tantra retreats for men, women, couples, singles. We also have female-only retreats just for the ladies stepping into their divine feminine. We have play parties. We have Tantra workshops, Tantra yoga, women's circles. We've got all kinds of really powerful in-person events. You can find all the details at www.talktantratome.com/events. You can also just go to talktantratome.com and click the events tab to find out about all the latest and the greatest. And if you're wanting me all to yourself, I can't blame you. I also host private retreats for both individuals and couples. Those are one-on-one, you get me all to yourself, and I'm available for private Tantra workshops and performances. And this is great for events like your birthday or maybe a bachelorette party or bachelor weekend. We can talk and create something that will be extra special just for you. So I cannot wait to connect with you in real life. But for now, thanks so much for your patience with this brief interruption, and let's get back to the episode.
So for Vata, that's the air and space. They're the lightest of the elements, so they need grounding or rooting. And so one of the things that is the most grounding for Vata is having a routine.
Okay.
And so like routine meal times, routine sleep and wake times, but it's something that they're so resistant to because they want to just flow and do whatever they want,
Routine, like flow is my routine, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it can't be strict, it's like the flow is my routine.
And so there's it's like having the masculine and the feminine. It's the feminine needs the container in order to fully, come into her, gifts and be, otherwise she's just the ocean all over the place,
Yeah.
And so the same thing is that Vata, if you give it a container, then with those routines, then it will have the container with which to have that creative fire really show up and then translate that outwards to the world. So routine for Vata, but also oil. So it's very dry. And so having, for you, if you've got more Pitta, then you wouldn't want to do the oil, but just a general Vata is supported by the opposite of dry is oil. It's not wet in Ayurveda. And so that means oil on the body in the form of the self-lymphatic massage, abhyanga, oil in the food. And so I would say having like warm cooked soupy meals with healthy fats. And the routine is probably the best for Vata.
Okay.
For Pitta, so this is, the fiery constitution. They have a lot of perfectionism and kind of a lot of judgment that they have for themselves, but also outward, so you judge yourself, you judge others kind of thing. And so they are best supported by some kind of practice that brings them back to the moment, to the present moment, and back to the center, because they're so future focused on achieving goals. And it's like one of the analogies for Pitta is like the head driving the body around, because it's like it thinks something and then it's just like, body, we're going to do this, even if you're, we don't care if you're tired or, not feeling it, like we're going to do this, and so having, I would say, some kind of breath work or meditation practice, something that kind of gives them a bit more of a holistic perspective and brings them back to the present moment is very supportive. And then because they are so fiery, they may have a tendency to want to do things like hot yoga and eat spicy food, those Bikram yoga practices they're going like every day. So the things that are more cooling, and you can choose cooling foods and choose to swim in like Barton Springs or like a cool body of water or a pool versus go to the hot yoga, that kind of thing. So, and then for Kapha, they are the densest of the elements, the water and the earth. And so there's a lot of beauty to Kapha. I feel like they're often kind of misunderstood, and people, idolize the aesthetic of the Vata constitution or even the Pitta, but the Kapha is like what binds it all together and what creates like the juiciness and softness and the love of life, and to just be in the present. And but when those elements are out of balance, when they're too high, it can be stagnation. So the advice for Kapha would be to find something that they feel like a devotion to, because the kapha is also, it's this love, it's this devotional quality because it's oily and it's just enveloping. And so some practice where they can take that devotion and use devotion as a catalyst to create something in the world. And so, and then also to do some kind of morning movement would be really helpful, because as we sleep, we increase kapha, increase that stagnation. And so having some movement in the morning helps to break up the excess kapha and sort of enliven that person for the day. So those would be my recommendations, kind of key things that came to mind for each dosha. And I do have an Ayurvedic course that goes into more detail. You asked earlier of, how can someone find more out about their constitution? So it gives you, the questions that you need to analyze that for yourself. But then it's really fun. There's like all these like quiz questions throughout, and that are real life examples of what to do, and test your knowledge and then give you recommendations.
Yeah, super fascinating. I absolutely love this. And it's also interesting because I find that a lot of the things that you were talking about, we tend to do intuitively. Like my partner, who is more innately kapha, like he works out every morning, and that's like a part of his practice. It's super interesting. But anyways, Ayurveda is a sister science to Tantra, and you these like goodies, like Ayurvedic foods under the brand of Tantra Kitchen or Tantra Kitchen.
Oh, yeah. So I have and I may expand it into other foods. Like that was the idea, to have this label. But I have these treats. They're like date bites that are my brand is Tantra Kitchen. And the idea is that I almost brought you some, but I didn't have a chance to make a new batch. Next time. Yeah. So the idea is that when we nourish our body, the reproductive tissue is the deepest layer of the body. In Ayurveda, there's 7 layers, 7 major tissues, and nourishment goes through a process of 40 days to nourish your reproductive tissue. So if it's you eat something today, it's going to have to nourish every single tissue before it gets to reproductive tissue. And that makes a lot of sense from a procreation standpoint, because you're not going to say you don't have good supportive lymph or blood, you're not going to have the nutrients to create a baby. So it is the tissue that kind of gets stolen from in a way, because if other tissues need it, then, and it makes a lot of sense, because say you're really anxious and you're nervous, your nervous system is right before reproductive tissue. And oftentimes, women who are so stressed out about wanting to have a child, or they're just overworked and they're just working too hard, they can never get to that point of nourishing reproductive tissue because their nervous system's taking it all. So the whole brand idea is when you support your reproductive tissue, it means that your whole body is nourished. And there are a few foods that are called ojas building, and ojas is the product of digestion of your reproductive tissue. So when your reproductive tissue is nourished and it creates its next product, it's ojas. It's like that juiciness of life. It is actually the superfine essence of kapha. And so, when you see this kind of balanced kapha woman, she's got the hips and she's got the breasts, and it's like she's just oozing that sexuality, sensuality. It's because she's got really good ojas. And so I think the word mojo actually comes from ojas.
Look at that.
And so my treats, the brand Tantra Kitchen, the date bites are ojas building, so they nourish that ojas. And so there are certain foods that kind of bypass the 40 days and go directly to nourishing reproductive tissue. And so some of the ingredients in that do that. And that's why I created that particular product.
That's so interesting. It reminds me of aphrodisiacs, but it's like nourishing your turn on in a different way. It's like instead of sparking the turn on, it's like nourishing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
And it's interesting too, because rasa is, your coffee, rasa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so rasa means taste. It also means juice. And when you rejuvenate your body, it's called rasayana. Ayana to lengthen, and rasa make the rasa bigger. And so rasayanas are herbs that are rasayana. Practices that are rasayana are those that nourish your reproductive tissue. So it's this idea that when you are inspired, because that nourishes rasa, when you're inspired and when you've got good hydration, which nourishes your rasa, your lymph too,
Yeah.
and it's creating youth, and youth is symbolized by reproductive tissue being healthy. And so these rejuvenative practices are all about increasing that rasa and building ojas. And I think so many people are interested in that. It's like, how can we become more juicy,
Yeah. So what are some of these food states, it sounds like?
Well, so every ingredient in the date bites, so the dates and the almonds, and then I put some Ayurvedic herbs in there. There's some ashwagandha, and then there's some heart opening tinctures, like there's a homeopathic called Fields of Flowers. And so
I love Field of Flowers.
Oh, you love that? Have you seen it
Yeah.
by Energetics?
Yeah, I was prescribed it by a functional medicine doctor when I was going through a breakup. And then I also had, like, a couple of months later, I was diagnosed with like a cyst the size of a tennis ball. It was like pretty intense. And she was like, make sure you keep taking Field of Flowers. And yeah, it was really nourishing for me. And I just love that it's called Field of Flowers.
Yeah, it's not everybody notices it, but it's subtle but very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's some other foods. Really anything that builds rasa, so that's your lymph.
Okay.
So you want to clarify the rasa, but then you also want to nourish it. So things that are hydrating, you could think about aloe and cucumber, and things that are clarifying would be things like holy basil.
Yeah.
And ginger also clarifies the lymph. And so you can combine some of these things depending on what your unique body needs. Like some people need to purify the rasa, some people need to build more of it. And then more on the energetic level, it is feeling inspired.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something that we, that really resonates so much with me, is because I feel like, at least when I was growing up, like people just did whatever they were told, and never really sought that thing that what makes me feel like excited and juicy and inspired, and I think that kind of loops back to the beginning of our conversation.
Turned on.
Yeah.
Turned on by life. How does it happen? Okay, cool, beautiful. And I've also seen you like talk about some of the other things you prescribe to your patients, and like one of them is like chocolate for like moods. And can you speak into that a little bit?
Well, so that's coming from functional medicine. They've done studies that there's different stages of adrenal fatigue, and adrenals are exhausted when vatta's up. So when we do things that increase vata, it's going to tax the adrenals. And so there's different stages of adrenal fatigue. There's early, there's mid, and then there's late. And so kind of for that mid phase, you can have some chocolate, and it actually nourishes your adrenals just like an herb would.
Wild. That's so cool.
It's dark
so
chocolate.
cool. Yeah, it's gotta be the good, pure stuff. I'm sure no Hershey's here.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to get one that's not laden with heavy metals too.
Yeah, and Nisha's obviously a resource for this, right? So people can reach out to you, work with you, hire you as a consult to dial it in.
Yeah, what chocolate should I eat?
What is the ideal chocolate for my consultation? I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, I'm feeling like a natural sort of close here. Is there anything you want to add or speak into on, this topic, or anything that you feel like we haven't addressed that feels like really alive?
I guess I wonder if you have any questions for your audience around Tantra and Ayurveda.
What does Tantra mean to you? And what is the connection for you between Tantra and Ayurveda?
Okay, so Tantra to me means that it really is actually, I meditated on this one time. I wanted to just get like a download on what is Tantra. So I'm going to share that definition.
Yeah.
So it's shortening of the gap between the object and the observer. And so in Ayurveda, we have these terms, sattva, rajas, tamas, and sattva, the observer, rajas, the observation, and tamas is the object. And that's just one definition. And so in Tantra, you can be tantric with anything. It could be a person, it could be a velvet couch. And it's it's essentially me, the subject, experiencing this object and shortening the gap between me and the object such that there's a oneness. There's a sort of shortening of that gap. So I no longer feel separate from this couch. I no longer feel separate from my partner. And so,
That's so yummy. It sounds like MDMA. Some kind of heart opening. Woo, I love it.
yeah. So that's what Tantra means to me. And how are Ayurveda and Tantra connected? It really is that science of knowing oneself and coming back to self so that you know what it takes to be centered in your body.
Yeah.
So that your spirit can connect to something else and have access to an experience like this, you know, to feeling one with everything that you choose to feel one with. And so I think Ayurveda is about having that self-knowledge so that you have access to experiencing something more than yourself.
Yeah, so it sounds like in a way Ayurveda is like supporting this sort of perspective of life, which I love. And that's how I experience it.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't quite do this, but it might still happen. But I thought about creating a course where essentially it is all those steps of how can you achieve the physical healing, the mental healing, work through these various sort of layers of the energy field so that you can be your most tantric self, you can be your most sexually embodied expressed self and have access to these experiences of union. And so I definitely think that, you know, if you have yeast overgrowth and your vaginal area is irritated, you're not going to want to connect with your partner, you know, and it's like, not even that, it's just you don't have access to the rasa, the juiciness, the wetness, the lubrication, if you've got an imbalance in your, you know, in your vaginal tract. So it's just so important to focus on all these layers of health and healing, physical, mental, emotional, all of it, so that, you know, it's like a journey through your auric field.
Yeah.
And once you know, move through one layer, you go to the next, and then you find that Anandamaya kosha, that bliss body that can connect to everything.
Yeah. Amazing. I love this. What a beautiful note to begin to close on. So where can people find you, support you? What is out there to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's nishakanamd.com. And I have several courses on there. The Ayurveda course that I mentioned. There's a gut reset that I share with patients coming more from the functional world. And even an Ayurvedic self-ritual, like a beauty and self-rituals course. And so there's some courses that, you know, really anybody can access around the world. And then in Austin, I work privately with patients, taking them on wellness journeys, so they can, you know, book that through the website too. And then I'm on Instagram a little bit, not too much. I'm going to try to get more on it. And yeah, just I have other podcasts that I've, you know, shared on the internet, the places, and people like to listen to those and learn more.
Amazing. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the listener for tuning into this beautiful conversation about health and wellness and being turned on by life. Have a sexy and spiritual day, and we'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me.
Okay, bye. Thank you.